Hello, and I'm David Craig Utz, and I want to welcome you back to Unfazed Under Fire podcast. I am joined today by Dan Blackburn, and actually I'm joined for a second time by Dan because we did a podcast before, had a great conversation, and had a technical difficulty. Dan was kind enough to come back and join me again to re-record this, and we're making sure that that doesn't happen again. So I appreciate you joining us today, Dan. And let me just introduce a little bit about you, and then you can add some color to it and fill in some gaps where I might have missed some things.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Glad to have you back. So you began in the health and wellness industry. I think you had a franchise gym called My Gym for a period of time that you operated your business out of, and for about, I guess, 5 years you had that. And then you came through to connect with Whole Foods, and you can talk a little bit about how that happened. But then you ended up at Whole Foods for 28 and a half years. And in the last 8 of that, you ended up in an executive role for Whole Foods. So you really moved up and spent a lot of time. So that told me that that was giving you a lot in your life at the time. And during that period of time, if you weren't busy enough as an executive, about 11 years ago, during your time you were still at Whole Foods, you launched Tula Yoga in Wellness, and have a beautiful studio that I've been a part of and have participated a bit in. And as that progressed, I think it was during the time when Whole Foods and Amazon kind of got together, and you decided without a bad taste in your mouth, Amazon was just not a fit, and you ended up launching your Tula Organizational and Wellness, and have been doing executive coaching for a couple of years now, and have built a pretty successful practice. And you also have a book coming out. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I want us to talk about that in a minute. But I'd love to have you say about how do you see your journey leading you to where you are today, and anything you want to add to that stream of consciousness that I just shared.
Yeah. So pleasure to be back here, by the way. I'm welcoming the opportunity. We did have a great conversation. So
Yeah.
long time ago, when I was in the health and wellness industry, I was actually a massage therapist, and Whole Foods brought me in to do chair massage on the opening team in Raleigh. And that's actually how I got hooked up with Whole Foods Market in the first place. I thought it was interesting that a grocery store would bring in a massage therapist, and then I got hooked. They walk their talk. I really enjoyed the atmosphere, the culture, the way people treated each other. Gave me an opportunity to move back up here to the Twin Cities to open up the St. Paul store as a store leader, and or actually associate first, and then really quickly thereafter as a store team leader. And then so that started my store leader journey, as opening and running stores. When we opened the second store in the Twin Cities, the nepotism policy came out, which I really appreciate and understand. That's when we decided to open up the Children's Fitness Center. So my wife and I opened that up.
Great.
I continued, obviously, to work for Whole Foods. And then really the opportunity came up to become an executive for Whole Foods Market, which I did. Enjoyed that. Traveled around the upper Midwest, Ontario, Canada quite a bit. My territory at one time extended from, Lexington, Kentucky, and actually earlier than that, all the way over to Lincoln, Nebraska. And
It's a big
so,
territory. Yeah.
yeah, and it was 15 to 17 stores at a time. I like to work with those teams and the culture, and then at the we took a hiatus from the gym. Obviously, we sold that for a while and decided to open up the yoga studio with a specific. We didn't want just your kind of we didn't want the yoga fit kind of a yoga. We wanted people to really start to reconnect with themselves,
Yeah.
go through some recovery, My wife became a yoga therapist, which is really one-on-one. I started to follow in her footsteps, and it made a lot of changes. It brought a lot of things up for me and how um, what I wanted in my life, and eventually, like you said, that Amazon started to buy Whole Foods Market. It wasn't something that actually lined up for me to work for them. I mean, I enjoy Amazon. I order from Amazon. I still shop at the Whole Foods Market, which is owned by Amazon. Um, it's just not someplace that lined up for my personal values to work for them. So,
Yes, makes sense.
um, yeah, and so we opened up. We added on the Tula organizational wellness piece of, and which is really the coaching, facilitation, executive coaching type of stuff that I do with executives and actually teams and even whole organizations. And we run that out of Tula.
That's beautiful.
So that's kind of the flow
Yeah,
of it all in
yeah,
a
that's
short.
great. Well, it's interesting because I mean, I'm not thinking it's an accident that a lot of executive coaches had a different contextual and content wise experience of getting to know themselves and then coming to, that led to a different expression of oneself once you get to know thyself as the number one uh, thing that most of the philosophers say is critical if you're going to live life happily. So, it's interesting how when did you found that started unfolding as your wife got involved in yoga therapy and you got more involved in that, and so there was a personal experience you had in personal growth or professional growth through that led you to kind of where you are today. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely some other epiphany moments where I write about this actually in the book, but there were some epiphany moments that really started to shift my course to really have a deeper awareness of not only who I was, but how that was being reflected into the world, than to really
Yeah,
own it as who I
yeah,
am.
yeah,
And that really became even more clear when we opened up the studio and I started to really understand, oh, so this is what it feels to feel myself in here.
yeah,
I had spent plenty of time ignoring what the body felt like and was doing,
yeah,
stuck in my
yeah,
head. Um, and it did start to shift things. So yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. I think if all the executives that I know that have done not only just a burst of personal growth, but actually a deeper, um, make it a habitual kind of a here's who I am. This is a like really committed to self-development, not just in a skill, but really who are you?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, those folks make, in my opinion, the best executives.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot to go in there. I want to talk a little bit before we go there to talk about what it was like to work with John Mackey and what do you most appreciate about that opportunity to get to know him and work with him at Whole Foods and what he did. Again, you were at the beginning of the launch of conscious capitalism. For those who may have heard that movement is out there, but you were before that. Whether or not he was involved with Raj Sisodia conversations before that or not, but you were there when that kind of whole thing unfolded. So say a little bit of what that was like, what your experience with that was like, what you have taken away from that you still utilize and activate in your work.
Yeah. So one, I really appreciated John Mackey. Still appreciate John Mackey. He's a great guy, great person to talk to. Um, he's a competitor, through and through. He is a competitor, and I met him the first time actually in Raleigh, North Carolina. He actually was at the opening of the St. Paul store when we opened, and he was one of the guys that actually was with a broom, sweeping up the bulk, saying hello to customers. And I got the pleasure to talk with him, over the years, fairly often. We'd have a tribal gathering in Texas or somewhere else. Sometimes it was Seattle or somewhere else, but it usually ended up in Texas. Anyway, seeing the evolution of conscious capitalism and what it could mean, to be more than just hungry for profits. It was really, in my opinion, a natural evolution of where Whole Foods had come from. Anyway, they had the stakeholder model. Um, which I still use a lot of. The stakeholder model is, let's not just look at the stockholder, who
Right.
else benefits and who else actually pays for what we do in the world, and
Right.
how can we have that really good relationship with the world around us. um, and to me, that was like one of the big pillars of we're not here just to be a parasite and suck everything off or suck the profits off of the
Right.
world. We're
Right.
actually
Right.
here to help it thrive as a whole.
Yes. Yes.
and and so that's one of the things I really enjoyed about it. And there was usually some kind of a imbalance. Sometimes the stockholders did need more, sometimes the team members did need more, sometimes
Mm.
we needed to pay more attention to the vendor community or the manufacturers, or you know other people that were out in the world that um, we could support in some way, shape, or form. And John and his team figured out a way to do that in a pretty healthy way.
Yeah. 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 And so, we look at that whole movement out in the world, and you see it's kind of gotten traction in a way, and it's still having a hard time getting some traction in other ways. What do you think has to happen for that model to blossom more in the world? Do you think that it's limited in some ways to blossom more?
That is a really good question, David. I've actually given that a lot of thought. Especially in today's world, at least in the US, where we're really, you know, we've got a big division. I'm sure everybody knows that. But the
Yeah.
thing is, we're going from the common language here that I see is almost always, what about my needs? What about my needs? What about my needs? Which makes it much more of a um, all about me instead of all about the whole. It's more about
Yeah.
scarcity
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah. Yeah.
abundance.
Right.
And and I believe that, when companies can actually have a really good, deep conversation with their entire team and start to really lay out not only a platform of what this means to be in more of an abundant culture, um, but it takes work from even that point on. We can't just leave
Yeah.
it be. It's like, no,
Yeah.
we're
Just
constantly going back to that core value, constantly, showing why it means something, constantly being in kind of a proof. And I imagine it gets exhausting.
yes.
Um, but if that work isn't done to maintain that original thrust, then we lose it.
Yeah. Well, we can, it's kind of like, I guess we can choose whether to be in the suffering of the way things operate now and all the challenges that a disconnection from employees and stakeholders and a lack of conscious leadership being developed in those that are leading the organization throughout the organization, which is the other pillar, and then having a sense of deeper purpose beyond profit that doesn't discount profit but balances out the profit drivenness, right?
Mm-hmm.
As one of my mentors said, what's unbridled growth? Cancer, right? It's like it's if you don't have checks on that, we see what can happen with corruption and lack of integrity and how it becomes easy for a really good person to start crossing lines they would have never thought they would cross. And that creates a lot of problems. And I was just talking to a client today, just to disconnect and trying to get their culture right and realizing that he has having concern with an employee, and it was really a cultural issue, not an employee issue. Like how we're having this conversation and what you're attending to and what I'm attending to are in conflict. And
Yeah,
that doesn't have to be the case. We could have had alignment around what we're trying to create together. And now this conversation's a different way. How do we make this work? In the
yeah,
and how do we solve this dilemma together in alignment rather than as people that think they have a different point of view on or a different belief about what we should do, right? Which gets into conflict that is unhealthy many times.
exactly. We have those siloed positions, which then creates destructive conflict rather
Right.
than, what back to the purpose, what is our purpose here? And let's agree on that. And then let's have a productive conversation. Even if there's disagreement, let's have a productive disagreement about how to get there, ending
Right.
up with still more alignment.
Yeah.
And it just helps me to understand your view that way, not get stuck on mine as the one and only way. There's more than one way.
Absolutely. Well, this kind of speaks into your whole name, Tula, right? Which you
Mhm.
and you illuminated me last time as a Sanskrit word that means balance, right? So it's really speak to that a little bit. Like, why does that word have so much meaning to you? Maybe you just spoke to it a little bit just in what you just said. It's part of who you are. But what drew you to that word and to make a name for your business? And why do you think it applies now to working with organizations?
Yeah. So balance, I mean, first, balance is never just a straight up 50-50. Sometimes we go 60-40, sometimes we're 30-70. There's always like this little
Yeah, yeah.
rhythm.
It's never perfect
And
50-50, right? Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And if it was, it's like, okay, we're flatline then, we need to have some variation here. But so it's really, back to where I was being all in my head and drive, 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 you know, I can speak for myself and say, I was leaving plenty of broken people in my wake, or people that really didn't like what I was doing, or and so for me to say, you know what, I need to step back a minute and create a little bit more balance in my life. The first tenet of yoga, there's 8 limbs of yoga. The first tenet being yamas, and the first thing in yamas is ahimsa, which is nonviolence. And that's really, when I looked at my life and was like, okay, great, here I am. I am not kind to myself.
Hmm.
And therefore, I'm really not kind to many people out there either. And when I really
Right.
admitted that and
Yeah.
started to take some time to, you know, not just be driving forward, but actually sit in the moment and be content, or even celebrate some successes here and there, and create some balance in, accept some acknowledgments, those kinds of things, where I could really see not only the fruits of the labor, but participate in eating them, not just keep on moving.
Right.
um, then I started to really see those stakeholder model basically is what is really happening here. The ripples that I'm making
Right.
have effects out in the world. They have, and everybody has this. Those
Yes.
I, so many executives I know they're stuck behind the desk. They've got, the world view is really pretty narrow, and
Right.
if we can balance that out with what else is going on in their life, um, most of the time, at least through yoga, you can do it through the breath, through the mind, through the body, and really start to create some good balance. So to your podcast, it starts to bring in some resilience
Yes.
instead of just the battering ram, or the giving up.
Right.
And so that's why we created that.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well said. And and this kind of bleeds into like maybe the premise behind Lost and Found, your book, which is in pre-release mode. You're in your pre-release campaign right now. Very exciting to have that happen. So, dovetailing from what you were just talking about, tell me a little bit about that project and what you're trying to communicate through the book to people that are going to be reading it.
Yeah. Yeah, so Lost and Found is the title of the book, and yeah, at this moment in time, we're in pre-sale, and that'll last until the end of May. And the reason why I wrote the book is there was one of those early epiphanies, which happened when I had been working literally 7 days a week, open to close, and I didn't really need to, but I felt I had to. And my wife walked up to me one day and said, "So is this the way things are going to be? Because if it is, you might as well just quit and start somewhere else." And I really didn't want to do that. And she signed us up to go to a camping, and no power, no phone. And oh my God, going from completely connected all the time, working all the time, to silence in the
Stop, right? It's
woods.
almost like a
Yeah.
stop, right? Right. Yeah.
It took me 3 days before I could actually
Relax.
stand it. And at the end of, that's the sixth night, I was sitting beside the fire, and had completely disconnected. In my opinion, my nervous system had kind of reset to a sense of normalcy. And I had gone to a sauna, came back and had gone to the sauna. The boys were sleeping. And I just started crying because I couldn't remember the last time that I felt that good. So in the story, I take that moment and know that there's all these mentors. We all have these mentors in our life. Most of them we don't even recognize as mentors. They give us
Yeah.
these little thoughts that kind of catch us for a moment, and often then we forget about them. And
Right.
so I created this mentor in my book that really coached me through getting back to myself and in what I consider self mastery. Um, and
Hmm.
that's really what the book is about: is finding that balance and becoming more of the master of self instead of everything else being the master of me.
Right. Beautiful. How does that philosophy inform your approach to what you your philosophy on leadership and what it takes to develop it? So, if you take that and look at your work as an executive coach, it'd be a great conversation for us to have. Like, what is leadership to you, and what is the primary means for it to be unfurled or to become more present in the expression of the human being?
Yeah. So leadership to me is just so many things. It depends on what that leader is, what is the purpose of that leader at the moment, whatever moment in time it is. Um, but more often than not, it has to do with, leading others and getting others safely to the other side. Or, it's not just about the goal, which to me is the biggest difference between my way of coaching and others is that, I mean, I can drive towards a goal. I can read a P&L as good, if not better than most. But to me, it's about how many people are going to be with us when we meet the other side, when we cross that finish line and actually do what we said we do. Do we look around and we actually see our team with us? Are they applauding each other, clapping each other in the back, or, acknowledging each other's work? Or is the leader just going to cross the line by themselves and look back and see this like battlefield of
Heap,
desolation?
heap of people behind. Yeah.
And sure, they crossed the goal. Maybe they brought the company forward to this goal of whatever that goal is. But it doesn't really mean anything, in my opinion, unless we've brought some people with us. So how do we do that skillfully? That's leadership.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, there's different. I mean, leadership is a word that's almost thrown around so nonchalantly now. If you're in a position, you're a leader, and of course, we don't. I don't think you agree. I don't agree. It just a position makes a leader. It doesn't. It can if you. That's where you're defining leadership. But my definition is like in the area of what I call enlightened servant or authentic courageous leadership, which is really about creating. Fundamentally, leaders are creators, and I think creators of environments that allow for something to happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise, right? And they do
Yeah.
that through their vision, they do that through their presence, they do that through their interpersonal engagement with others, they do that by developing culture, right? And you're right. There's different times in a leader's tenure when different things are more important or less important. But ultimately, it goes back to what am I creating that's pulling people forward. That's in a sense at the highest level is making them look good. I don't care how I look. It's how do I make my team feel like they're the ones that did it because they did, and they get some credit for that, right? And they cross the finish line with me, and we're high fiving each other.
Yeah.
Oh, we got through that one, even if it was we got through that one. You know,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
completely agree. We've got an aspirational goal that we're achieving. We've built a base of trust, which is what you said, it's safe and it's
it's safe.
so people can
Yes,
actually, express themselves safely. Um, we've we've got some productive conflict, which helps us stay aligned. This is to Patrick Lencioni's model. We can create some commitments. We can have some
hmm,
accountability. In my opinion, 2/3 of that accountability is what are you doing to celebrate, not just
yes,
punish.
yes,
Um, and then really acknowledge the fact that we're moving towards this aspirational goal and and create that culture and really trust and honor each other in that.
yeah. And that's, it's watching people, and I coach, and I think you probably do as well, people that are sometimes transitioning or have been there and needing to, that it's getting to, maybe they're feeling like they're putting too much effort into it, or they're a little bit trying to figure out how to inspire and uplift people. And a lot of times they're trying to figure out from an external, and then you're going back to your comments earlier, well, what are you doing to inspire yourself, right? If you're going to expect that inspiration out there, if you're going to be kind to others, you got to start being kind to yourself. It's the same thing, right?
Hmm.
If you're going to be, an inspiration for others, how are you inspired? Or or are you looking at inspiration as a way to get them to do what you want them to do? What's the motivation behind that? And I find that the best leaders I work with have a motivation to develop people. They care about the people around them. They want to see them shine and want to see them grow. To me, that's one of the best signs when I start working with somebody, if their people are highly important to them. If it's not their top priority, it's one of their top priorities.
Yeah,
And yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
I agree. When as an executive, I'd go to stores. I mean, often I would go to stores that were um, not performing as well as they could, and you could always tell when you walked into the store if the team was actually communicating with each other or not. That team was always a direct reflection of the leadership of that store. And so if I could get in almost like a sneak attack, right? Just get in without any name tag, hat or apron, and just
yeah,
walk around and get to know what's going on in the store, what the overall culture was like, could pretty much tell what was really going on. It
yeah,
didn't really
yeah,
matter then what the actual leader told you. You already had proof, if you would, of what needed to change. And yeah, and once that was found out and people could actually get back in alignment and celebrate each other, and build those skills and build the people, as you said, everything just got a lot easier.
yeah. I mean, we can feel it. It's so what you say is so true. If you can just hang out in an organization for a day, you can tell what the leadership is, right? It doesn't take long. How stressed are people? How are they getting along with each other? How are they using their time? All those kinds of things you can see right away. Where the opportunity, and where's the loss of opportunity, right?
Right.
In that.
Are they
Yeah,
operating out of fear? Are they operating out of joy? You know,
yeah. Well, and I look at today, this kind of gets into the topic area for today. I look at leaders I would say, have a tougher job of that today than any other time in my own lifetime that I've been, and certainly over the 26 plus years that I've done this work, I've seen more pressure on executives today than ever for various reasons. Many are saying now that resiliency is the number one skill a leader has to obtain. And so I'm curious to see if you agree with that, or it's one of the top skills, and why that's so. Why would you say that that's an important one to develop today in these times?
I absolutely agree with you. There is a tremendous amount of pressure um, to get things done, and you know, in my opinion, that whole definition of resilience is not only to be able to strive forward and galvanize the crew and move forward, but then also take some time to relax a little bit, or somehow build yourself back up and let the team recover as well. And it's that recovery time that's missing, you know and in my opinion, that's what's burning people out. It's not that they're tired of the job, they're just freaking tired completely. They're just nothing left.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that form, and it's not just executives, it's across the board. People all over the place are just, you're trying to move forward and you don't have the energy anymore.
yeah. Well, it's a chronic. It's your executives and employees are under a chronic stress, right? Constantly pushed. What did you do for me yesterday? What did you do? Not what did you do yesterday. What are you doing for me today? Or how's that going to affect tomorrow? We're constantly, on that. And really, the hamster wheel metaphor is even more appropriate today. How do you get off the hamster wheel? What do you mean? Take a break? What do you mean? Take care of myself? I don't have time. And yet, if you don't do that, once you once you pass that line of burnout, you're going to be out for weeks or months. Or
Yeah.
you're just not going to be you're going to be 50% effective. So if, and the funny thing is there's not a limitation in our cerebral realm of what's possible, right? And maybe in other realms too, but the physical, we've been given physical limitation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And executives tend to push themselves. They forget they have a body, as you even found out in your own personal journey. We forget there's this thing that we almost have to carry. And then for me, it was like I was lugging this thing around for most of my life until I ran into my own buzzsaw, right? And realized, hey, I got to become friends with this thing. It carries me. It takes care of me. It digests my food, everything it does for me, and lets me enjoy life. So yeah, and it also I think it's important. Resiliency, resilient. It's not just about recovery. It's also you somehow can be made better through the process of having to be resilient, take care of yourself, but also through the what I would call the positive stress that we go under to deal with challenges. If we do that well, like how can you do it? Like, what's one way you maybe this is you could talk about. What's one way you could do it that's going to take you down the wrong path, and what's one way you could do it where facing stress is going to make you better after it's over? Is that a fair question? I don't know if that's understandable. Like,
Yeah. So it's interesting if we back up just a minute and talk about that whole resiliency from almost
sure,
from a biological standpoint, right? We've got so I think you were talking about eustress, right? That good
yeah,
stress that helps us actually build some resilience. But we've also got then, when we start to get too stressed, or maybe we're sitting at the desk and we're kind of hunched up over or whatever, and we're starting to breathe in our upper chest, and again, kind of letting our whole lower part of our body just sit because it's only there to keep us there. It's like a thing. But when we breathe out of the upper chest a lot and have that short, stressful breath, then we start to get even more tunnel visioned. And as when you inhale, your heart rate goes up a little bit, and when you exhale, your heart rate goes down a little bit. And a lot of us, myself, I'm definitely was one of these people. When we get under stress, we start to inhale and hold the breath, which keeps
yeah,
us in that kind of a higher rate
hyper,
of, yeah.
yeah,
And so part of resilience to me is building that heart rate variability where yes, you can get to that high rate so you can be in, fight, flight, or freeze if you need to, but you can also then come back
relax,
down and let your mind kind of open up and see what's beyond just this immediate goal. Now, to your other question, the importance of, if you don't do that, like if all you're doing is leaning in, then it ends up to be that tunnel vision becomes even more and more, apparent. But our body gets used to it, and it
yeah,
starts to think that it's actually normal, even
yeah,
though it's not. So we don't recognize eustress anymore because we're used to feeling, and we kind of get this sensation in our body that if we're not tense, if we're not slightly agitated or even angry, then we're not feeling normal anymore. And the whole idea of eustress kind of goes out the window because it's not even possible to come into the mind.
right. That's a
So if we
great
can
point.
back up, yeah, if we can back up a little bit, find breath, not like this huge big breath, but really nice and slow, concentrate on the exhale, start to bring yourself back down and move into the front cortex instead of just in
Right,
the limbic system,
right,
then eustress can happen again. And we can start to enjoy the test
right.
rather than do the test because it's
Push
something that
through.
has to be done.
Yeah, you had to push through it. Well, again, this is the relationship with resiliency and greater self-awareness. And what you say is under stress, you get more narrow, so your choices go down.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you're being fed more and more by the survival mechanism, which says fight, flight, run, whatever, or fawn, whatever you want to, whatever your strategy is, and you're less open to possibility, right?
Yes.
And
And some
and
people, to be honest, do
and
get more scattered under stress.
yes,
Um, still the possibilities become less.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, and there's different styles of dealing with stress, right? Depending on the style that you're working with or somebody that's working with it,
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense. Well, and I guess so. We're talking about like I want to go back to some of the things you said that you could do to build resiliency. But is there anything else you'd say about what depletes and chronic stress? Keep going, keep pushing. That depletes resiliency. Anything else you would say that you see executives do that actually hinder their ability to be resilient, or kind of anti-resiliency moves that they're making besides what you
Yeah,
said?
definitely food and drink, right? Water's a big thing. What they eat is a big thing. Not only what they eat, but when they eat it. Um, taking that time out. And I'm one of those people that actually doesn't eat breakfast until mid-morning. Then it's a snack. Um, and I know breakfast is supposed to be the most important meal of the day, and I think it is for some people, but it's really the quality of the food that you're eating is what's
Right,
making the biggest difference. And
right.
the water that you're actually drinking throughout the day, that time to have some reflection,
Yeah,
rather than just kind of at the end of the day, there's nothing left, so you fall asleep exhausted, doesn't actually give you the best sleep. It just is like you're in recovery. So there's there's ways that you can create balance in your life that will help you recover and build resilience, and actually help you even then take that when stress gets really high, it helps you prepare for that because you build in
yeah.
some reserves then.
Yeah, that's what resiliency does. It helps you build those reserves. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'm thinking about resiliency. Is it something that's really, if we're having these good habits, is it something that is actually natural to being human if you're doing the right things? That is it, there's this idea that I've got to, certainly look at my habits, change my habits. Like maybe I'm breaking fast, as you say, breakfast at a certain time, and I'm, maybe doing some, planned fasting or whatever we're doing, or I'm drinking, making sure I'm drinking my water every day, et cetera. I'm exercising. I'm doing all those things that help me. But as far as, you know, what does it take, I guess, to, is that natural? Do we find back, are we finding our way back to a natural place, or is it something that resilience is anti-human and, and we have to figure out how to create it?
I think
Not,
it's absolutely natural. I mean, there is kind of a nature versus um, nurture in here. So some of it's how we're brought up. I mean, a lot of kids these days, everywhere in the world, are brought up under a place of tremendous stress. And some of that might be natural, as far back as wherever. But I think it's more natural to be in some frame of resilience where we're not under constant stress all the time,
right.
where we've, you know, create a community around us, celebrate the people around you, take on obviously some pressure, some stress, some eustress, if you will, leaders that are kind of leading the tribe, if you will. But we're here as humanity because we live in
Yeah.
community. And
Yes.
now, unfortunately, more often than not, we're all alone in community, all squeezed. And and to me, that's anti-natural.
Yeah, we're next to each other, but we're not connected at the same time.
Exactly.
Right? And then we see social media as actually the social media connection is kind of, it's like the opposite of that. It's like it doesn't hurt, it actually hinders connection and increases divisiveness, which is a paradoxical thing. But it's interesting. I think you're pointing to something that I talked about with others, is the issue of connection to community. You know, we kind of are these islands that have all this rich resources around us and connection around us that could help us and we could help them. And for some reason, we've gotten into, And I'm sure the lockdowns didn't help. I think the lockdowns actually hindered and kind
I think
of
it was
put a
horrible.
it's put a lot of people in a situation where you find I've talked to people all the time. It says I used to go out all the time, and I found myself finding it harder to go out because I got in this habit of lockdown. And I think it really psychologically harmed us, and there's going to be some time to recover from that. It was really kind of one of the worst strategies they had during the pandemic was like keep everybody away from each other for long periods of time. Yeah, and we're naturally connected. We're naturally connected, and how do we? That's part of a leader's job too. We want to say that one of the leader's jobs is build that culture and foster that connection. I think one of the things that business leaders can do to really, and they have to understand, you know, this is where they can add value in a way that supports them and their other aims
I agree.
by them creating a culture and a sense of community, a place where you can come contribute, be in use stress, be also be also have fun, be taken care of, and sort of allow yourself to be taken care of, just get support from each other, learn how to foster feedback so that we're all growing together. When you're doing that, you're actually feeding the soul, right? You're feeding the best part of humanity, and you're going to get more productive, engaged workers out of it. You've seen that firsthand in Whole
Hmm.
Foods and their model, right?
Hmm.
When you went into a store, I would imagine, and you saw things had to be turned around, it wasn't like you were taking the whip out and going to the manager and saying, "What's going on?" You were having a conversation about, "Hey, how can we help you, with some of the challenges I see that are swirling about."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right on with the pandemic. For years we basically separated ourselves, and then there were those that didn't, and they somewhat had some resentment about those who did, and that created a whole new habit of being able to work at home if you could. Um, and then those that couldn't had some sort of resentment for those that could. So now we're really separating each other. And now, there's the effort to get back to work in an
Work is
office, which,
That's right.
for some people might not work. But on the other hand, I think because we are a community, in my opinion, there is there is a need to invite people back into the office because it helps them build that resilience. Um, to talk to people who are not completely 100% um, like-minded, to start to build some ways to communicate with each other across
Yes.
lines instead of just being isolated with your own thought process, or with thought processes that are similar to yours for a brief moment in time, and then you change the subject when it's not. So
Right.
to me, it's that building that community is building the capacity to hold others, even though they're not completely 100% agreeing with you. And,
Yeah. Well, we
that,
have that this is also leads into resiliency too, right? Because
right.
to be able to be resilient in conversation with diverse points of view is a mature way of operating that allows for something that isn't allowed otherwise. And you know, we've seen this with the destructive algorithms that social media has built. They only send you things that are of things you agree with,
Yeah.
because that makes more money than sending things that you disagree with and irritating you. You want to spend less time on Facebook, which would probably been a good thing. But now it's like we've created this thing like we we have these ideas of whatever side we're on, and the other side is dangerous, and we're actually destroying the very framework that we were brought up in and was created as a possibility in this country, for example, which was
Yeah.
to come together and allow everybody to be independent, to be in their own worlds, but come together in community and create things together at the same time. And to me, that was a great thing about this country.
That's the dream. I mean,
That's the
even
dream.
the Surgeon General came out and said, that loneliness is one of the biggest
Biggest.
things to American health. Not surgeon didn't the Surgeon General didn't actually say everybody should go back to work in a community. It- but if you look at the last 2.5, 3 years, when people are alone, anxiety and depression go up.
Right.
And so, you can love somebody and disagree with them at the exact same time.
Exactly.
And that's
Exactly.
almost a lost skill.
Well, again, I say this, and I had a conversation with another colleague on the podcast that will be coming out, who wrote the book, Language in the Pursuit of Leadership Excellence, and he's talking about how, we basically form assessments. That's our brain is built as an interpretive mechanism. It's
Hmm.
not built to see reality as it is, first
Hmm.
place. So we learn to interpret, and now then we come to believe that our interpretations are factual. And then if people seem to counter those and we're coming from a stand of fact, that creates a fight and flight situation.
Yeah.
Versus, I have this opinion, it is not real because the basis of opinion is made up, is interpretation. It could be a grounded interpretation that allows you to move in a certain way in life effectively. But if interpretation just simply gets you into conflict with people, is that moving effectively through life? Right?
Right. Are you
The
just trying to
question,
create conflict, or are we trying to create
right,
alignment here by bringing more people in?
right. And it's also back to safety. I feel safe in my opinion because it makes me make sense of the world as it is. And I now feel safer because I think I understand how the world operates, right? And that's the great illusion all of us are facing because there's something that we all have to face at the end that is unavoidable. Other than taxes, right? We don't want to think about that, so we're going to create a way to feel safe, right? Then it becomes a prison. No, that's what happens. It becomes a prison.
Yeah,
But again,
I agree.
yeah, but resiliency is. But I'm saying that being interpersonally resilient, and leaders understanding the value of differences of opinions and the values of saying I don't know. What do you think? You know, and the idea that they are facilitating something, they don't have to be the one that knows, right? They're facilitating a deeper understanding. And if they get that, and the leaders that start, it's like people, leaders are also very smart. Like they don't think about the stuff that you and I think about, right? So when we come
Mhm.
in and we provide a perspective to them, well, have you ever thought that maybe a different perspective might actually add value to your thinking about how to create this even a better product? And they begin to understand and get that and learn, okay, either I'm uncomfortable listening to differences of opinion, but I get used to that, and I can start seeing the value of being in a conversation with a difference of opinion, because it kind of creates a friction in the room that is healthy for us to explore what we actually ultimately want to create. But we agree what we're going to create and how we want to create it. If we get that into place, then we can disagree a whole bunch and come up with amazing solutions, innovative solutions that can change the world. And that's one of the reasons why I think that business leaders are actually best suited to help us solve some of the problems we're facing today. And that's what
I
we're
agree.
hoping, they have a business mindset. And if they can have that leadership component they can bring with us that we're talking about, they can help solve a lot of problems, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right on. In to your earlier point about, if you're just moving forward and there's no guardrails, then you end up in destruction. And that dynamic tension, like if you can invite that in, knowing it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, you're going to create a better product, and it's going to
Yeah,
serve more people.
right.
Um,
It's going to make
and
you more money.
yeah, I mean, eventually it
Eventually.
will.
Yeah.
Um, and what's ended up happening, and I think this, there's the part of resilience. I guess, in my opinion, there's been a bit of a shift. Like some people view resilience as defending themselves. And to a point, I guess there is a bit of that. But when we've defended ourselves to the point where we've just created a brick wall and there's nothing that's allowed in, then we've really created weakness and not
Yeah.
resilience. That wall is something that is going to break, and then you're left unguarded and unprotected. Whereas that, you're being able to move in and have these conversations and be able to expand your points of view creates better resilience all the way around, and a better
Absolutely.
product for
Uh,
leaders.
Absolutely. Really good. Um, well, one of the things I thought would be good is for you to talk a little bit about, you talked about it already about habits, eating and exercise and making sure you're having reflective time. But is there anything else you'd add, as far as what you'd recommend if you were to work with a leader and they said, tell me the two or three things I should be, or whatever, I should be focusing on to most enhance my resiliency, what would you say they would be?
Yeah, well, a couple things that besides those things, the water, the food, two things that always stand out are, are you taking time to celebrate successes, some wins? Um, Believe it or not, David, 90% of them, the
So
leaders that I worked with, just don't. It doesn't
they don't
occur to
think
them.
it's the same thing. I find the same thing. It's recognizing. They do postmortems at the end of projects. Sometimes they might not even do that. They just, okay, done. We'll move on, and they miss a huge opportunity to confirm some things
Yeah,
and have people feel good about what we just did, which actually reinforces the next project, right? It makes it
right.
better. Yeah,
Yeah, and it also brings everybody along with them. They want to participate.
yeah,
So that's one of the number one things, and how can they create a culture of acknowledgement and celebration? Um, and then the other one really, so we've already covered, I just want to reiterate this: water, food, sleep, right?
yeah,
Um, Definitely get out and do some exercise. Doesn't mean you need to go and do a power lift, but if you can take a walk, get out in the woods, take a walk around the city, find a park, find some quiet time, get away from the noise. Those are the two things I
yeah,
strongly recommend.
yeah. That helps a lot. Now, there's something we haven't touched on, and that I see a lot in the research on resiliency, and that the world is in kind of an epidemic of trauma right now. And
Hmm.
one of the things that can, even if you do all the right things, that can still you can still get triggered, you can still fall into traps as if you don't, or you're not resilient, even if you've done all the well-being stuff well. And that's something that is a big one to attend to. Executives are busy, right? They don't want to be necessarily sitting on a couch, an hour, two times a week, or working with a trauma therapist to work with. But there is those issues of being triggered, and when do you see that's something that an executive has to tend to? What are the warning signs that that's something they may have to be more seriously attending to, because that might be hindering their effectiveness?
Um, yeah, really. So, often there's so many different signs, and it's just kind of knowing the whole person when you're
Yes, working with them.
introducing yourself and getting an idea of what they do, how long have they been doing it, what is their life like. Um, you can, from the external perspective, you can actually look at their posture and kind of start to see some things right away. Um, you know, some folks will start to curl their shoulders forward, for example, which, and then maybe their chin starts to come out. So they'll start to build some physical stress that way, which is a
Right,
result of carrying this external stress.
right,
You might find some people with that retracted shoulder and they're in this kind of constant state of readiness.
right.
Those two postures, and generally speaking, most people are a combination of things, but those two specifically your body will produce hormones that keep you in there because it seems like that's where you want to
It's
be.
a natural.
Um,
It's yeah. It's like
right.
yeah,
So so maybe we do a physical practice. Maybe I can see how they're breathing. Believe it or
right.
not, a lot of folks under a lot of stress will breathe almost backwards. They'll, instead of allowing their belly to move, they'll actually bring it in their upper chest and then kind of hold it there. I talked a little bit about this before, but they're completely unaware of it. Um, and all of that starts to affect their mind. How much of a rapid decision maker do they need to be? We can start talking about that. We can start to really find blind spots, even in a conversation like you and I are having. How fast is somebody coming to a decision, or trying to get ahead of the game here because they've got some things to do? So we can start to bring that into their attention as well, um, and really just start to discuss what is their life like, and find
Right.
those blind spots there. Um, and a big question is, how long has this been going on?
Yes.
Did
Yeah.
was it sudden, or did it start like 10 years ago and you just haven't shifted course and now you don't know how? You're stuck in this rut, this pattern. And so it's helping people with those things and point out the blind spots and just the little things. Um, if you ever seen that poem, the hole in the sidewalk,
No, no.
I can't remember the exact thing, but basically a person's walking down the sidewalk, they see a hole in it, they acknowledge that there's a hole in it, but they fall in it anyway.
Oh, got it right.
And they don't take any responsibility for it until maybe the fourth or fifth time. It's like, oh, well, now there's a hole in the sidewalk. I get it. And I'm responsible for putting myself in it. And now I can climb out of it. So there's really acknowledging the habit in the first place. Sometimes that's hard. We don't
Yeah,
know what we're doing all the time.
right.
And then, and you need somebody, hopefully, somebody like a coach can help you do that in a
Right.
in a
They can
place of
observe, hey,
safety.
you're walking in the hole. You're walking in the hole. You didn't see that
Yeah.
you didn't see that was a problem.
Yeah. You can say, what's in front of you right now? What do you mean, what's in front of you right now? You know, I might be wrong, but is that a hole? And so suddenly just kind of opening up that space is like, oh my
Right,
God, I didn't see it. And
right.
from there you can start to really make some headwinds. But Viktor Frankl, and I'm not gonna do the quote exactly because I'd probably get it wrong, but he had this quote about there is an action, right? Something happened. And then there is a reaction, or something happens because of that initial thing. But in between, there is a space. And if we can just for a moment expand that
In that
space
space.
so that we can create a bigger pause, a sense of awareness, make some choices instead of, again,
Right,
going back to that limbic system and living in reaction. If we can expand that space, then you can start to make some choices that are more aligned with who you are as a person, something more aligned with
right.
the actual values that mean something to you.
Yeah, well, it goes back to, you and I shared experience early in the podcast about how we had to kind of face ourselves. And I think that, I was just talking to one of my clients today, and he recognized, and I kind of, it comes one of those moments for me when a client's teaching me and having me see something that was so obvious when they see it, I see it. And, it's almost like as an individual contributor, and maybe you're leading a team, you can get away with a lot of missing this stuff. When you go into the leadership position, whole different set of expectations open up that you never dealt with before. It's a completely new territory when you're first in it. You can certainly carry your habits into that, but what I find is it becomes harder and harder, and more people are then aware of how those habits cause problems, either in their relationship, for how you're moving something forward, for how you're leading your team, because it's a whole different, something's called more forward in you. That is a stressful thing if you haven't done the getting to know yourself,
Yeah,
right?
I love what you just said. Um, and I love working with emerging leaders, and that that, that individual contributor. Most often the individual contributor gets promoted to become a leader because they're really good at being an individual contributor, and then they take that habit and the skill into a leadership position where you're talking about, now they're at the 10,000 elevation and they're looking
Right.
down, but the skill that they have is to do
Individual,
it.
do it right, right,
And so, how do they let go of that and teach others how to do it, and
right.
really expand their footprint as a leader and a human? Sometimes some people can't do it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a big move, and again, the people that I find do it well feel a sense of there's some enjoyment in that. And they may not even fully taste it yet, but they know that they like what they're doing. And it's like we tend to promote people because they're contributors, but not necessarily all those people you pointed to really care to step out of that contribution role and deal with that interpersonal higher, much higher stress to be interpersonally effective and interpersonally intelligent and self-aware and attentive to what my needs are so I can understand other people's needs better. All that is a lot. Some people love that. They seem to have a flavor, and other people resist it, right?
Yeah,
And those are some of the more challenging ones. Clients that I sometimes deal with is they haven't made the choice. They did it because it was the
exactly.
next step in their career. And organizations almost do that by taking some of their best people and taking them out of that role because they assume that means they'll be a good leader. But they never say, do you want to lead? They say, you're being promoted to lead.
Or you just want the money,
You just want
you
the
know.
money and the prestige. Yeah, I know there's a lot of good things that come with it. Well, this again, as always, this is a great conversation. I appreciate the time you took again today, and we went down a little bit of a different path. It was a beautiful path, and I appreciate the time. Is there anything you want to say as we're completing or stepping out of the conversation, just to feel complete, and
Well,
what you wanted to
uh,
share?
yeah, one thing that's really interesting to me, and it's about maybe not feeling complete, but it's just a completely different perspective. Somebody, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, like, okay, what does a yoga therapist have to do with being an executive? And I said, have you ever sprained an ankle? I don't actually know anybody that hasn't sprained an ankle, but this person
Right,
said, yeah, I've sprained an ankle, and said, okay, so what happened to the rest of your body? Well, I mean, it had to kick in and help. I'm like, that's right. So the whole rest of your body compensated for this weakened ankle. Maybe you had crutches, some other things. So, but in the body, and as a yoga therapist, I would look at the whole body and say, okay, that body, all those muscles are compensating for this weak ankle.
right.
And as an organization, I can say the same thing. Like
Yes.
when you look at a company, how many sprained ankles are in that company, and how many other people are compensating to make up for that weak
Yeah,
ankle? And I'm not saying cut the body part out. We just don't do that, or you'd be less of a person. But how can you then
heal.
strengthen that ankle and
Yeah.
get it back into a fully participatory piece of the body or the piece of the organization? And the person looked at me, was like, I've just never thought about it that way. I'm like, well, I mean, honestly, if you look at your organization, where are the weak ankles? And
That's a name for a new book for you. The weak healing the weak ankles. I think you'll have to do that. But I mean, it's a great metaphor. I love the metaphor because it is really true. How much we might compensate for a toxic leader, or how much we might compensate for, you know, a team that's really being busy, but they're not necessarily accomplishing what they're set out to accomplish because
right,
we're afraid to give them the feedback or whatever it is. There's a million ways that happens. But again, it's like it goes back to something you said at the beginning and we talked about, which is, you have a couple of choices as building an organization. You can build it one way, which is through, which has been traditionally through top down, structure. We tell you what to do, you do it. I mean, I think that's becoming less of a model. It still exists though out there in a big way in certain
there's a
industries,
lot of
big time,
authoritarian
a
leadership. Yeah,
lot of authoritarian leadership. So you can lead through authoritarian leadership, and there are costs to that. And well, usually it's pay me later. You're going to get a lot of pay me later on that, right? Right? It's going to come back to haunt you, and you're going to be trying to compensate for a lot of weak ankles. Or you can go more the enlightened leadership path, servant leadership path, which takes continuous effort and focus and attention and awareness, which can be tiring, but in the long run, returns an investment in a big way.
yes,
And that's what what we need more in the world today is, I think, the latter than the former, right? Because we've had enough of, I mean, the other thing is, if you look at what authoritarian leadership does, it ends up depleting outcomes, and the few gain and the many don't benefit, or the many
right,
lose. And the other side, the many benefit, and the few still gain. That's the paradoxical thing
exactly
about it.
right.
It's like
Yes,
everybody wins in that situation. Um, So appreciate that. Well, thanks again for coming today, Dan. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate everybody that joined us for this podcast. Coming back to this episode on Unfazed Under Fire, I want to thank you for your attention, and I wish you a great rest of your day and week. And we'll see you next week on Unfazed Under Fire.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan, for coming.